We're learning a bunch of crap. This is the characteristics or properties of epithelial tissue. There's 4 types of tissues in the body: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. As we learn the 4 types, the best way to learn them is describe them by comparing them on their structures with the other types of tissues. We're learning crap, which is cellularity, regeneration, avascular, and polarity. This is only talking about epithelial tissue. So first, when we describe cellularity, and I look at this picture here, it's showing all these cells tightly packed together. Remember, the dark dot in the middle is the nuclei, so this is one cell here, and I look at that plasma lemma or cell membrane, it tells me it's another cell. So these cells, relative to the other types of tissues, are closely together. So when we look at connective tissue, we'll see that the cells are more spread out, and there's material that the cells made in between. We don't see that in epithelial tissue because the structure creates a function. We're trying to provide that barrier, because remember, our skin is epithelial tissue, and then also to control permeability. So cellularity, tightly packed cells relative to the other types of tissue. Regeneration, when we talk about regeneration, it just means out of the other types of tissue, epithelial tissue regenerates or goes through mitosis the most. When we look at our layers of the epidermis, there's 4 to 5 layers, but that changes over the course of a month. It sheds off very quickly. When I burn my tongue, you feel that sensation for a day or 2, but then it goes away, right? Because it repairs itself so quickly. Versus my brain, versus my heart, those are different types of tissue. They don't regenerate, sometimes not at all, or they regenerate very slowly. Avascular, A meaning without, vascular meaning without vessels. So they don't have direct blood supply. When I look at the picture here, the skin, this is the epidermis. Below it is connective tissue, and this is the dermis. When I look at the dermis, I can see those blood vessels. This is the blood supply for that epithelial tissue on the top. So I don't have direct blood supply in the epithelial tissue. It's supported by the underlying connective tissue. And then lastly, polarity. Polarity is usually the most difficult for students to describe, but it's 2 distinct ends. When I look at other types of tissue, you can't always see like there's one end and here's the other end. For connective tissue, we clearly see that. The best example is when we look at the epidermis, that I have a top layer and a bottom layer, just like a battery has a positive and a negative end. And we call that the basal surface and the apical surface. The apical surface is that free surface or free border where it's exposed to the environment. The top of the epidermis or superficial layer, this is the apical surface. The deep portion of it, where I have the base of the cells, this is the basal surface or basal border. We'll see what's called a basement membrane or basal lamina. So the end of the tissue as I go deep, that's my basal surface. Whereas when we look at other types of tissue, we don't see a distinct top and bottom. But when I look at a tube, it's the same idea. Remember, some of our glands and our tubes are made up of epithelial tissue. If I look at a tube, let's say this is of the kidney, and we're looking inside of the pipe, where the fluid is running, and we call that hole the lumen, but where I touch the inside of the cells, this is the apical surface. And remember, I said it's exposed to the external environment. So if I drink a liquid, say coffee, it still goes down into my body, reaches the urinary system, and is running through these tubes. This is still what we call the free surface or apical border, apical surface. So that edge, and then the base, like the outside of the tube or outside of the hose, this is the basal surface. So we can describe it as like a top layer, a top and bottom, like the skin, or the inside and outside of a tube. So 4 characteristics of epithelial tissue: cellularity, regeneration, avascular, and polarity. This crap is unique to the other 3 types of tissue.